I never thought I'd spend a Saturday afternoon poking holes in a slab of leather, but here I was, sitting in this cramped studio smelling like a mix of saddle soap and old wood, trying not to look completely useless. I signed up for this traditional leatherworking class on a whim, partly because I wanted to try something new, partly because I thought it'd make a good story. What I didn't expect was to meet someone who could make "too soft to waste" sound like the best compliment I'd ever gotten. The class was tucked away inside a converted warehouse on the edge of town. It had that perfect blend of rough charm and practical function. Exposed brick walls, wooden shelves lined with all sorts of leather scraps, metal tools hanging everywhere, and the faint hum of a sewing machine somewhere in the back. I was one of maybe 8 people, most of them older or already kind of leather nerds, judging by the way they handled the tools like extensions of their own hands. Then there was him, Eli. Tall, with that effortless, kind of lean muscle from, I guess, years of working with his hands. His dark hair was a little wild, like he'd just run a hand through it while explaining something. And he had this laugh that was surprisingly warm for a guy who looked like he could be intimidating. He was the teacher, but he didn't have that usual know-it-all vibe. Instead, he had this easygoing way of breaking things down that made it feel like anyone could pick up a needle and thread by the end of the day. When I first told him I'd never worked with leather before, he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, we all start somewhere." That was the start of a lot of teaching, and a little bit of teasing. The first task was simple enough, cutting a piece of leather to make a keychain. I was fumbling, the blade slipping more than slicing, and at one point I muttered, "I don't know how anyone makes this look good." Eli came over, crouched beside me, and without hesitation he took the tool from my hand and said, "You're too soft-handed. That's your problem." I laughed, thinking he was making fun of me, but then he added, "Your skin's too soft to waste on cheap leather that tears easily. You need the good stuff." It was such a weird thing to say, but the way he looked at me when he said it, like he actually meant it, made me pause. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was seeing past the surface, past the awkwardness and the fumbling. I was supposed to be learning a craft, but somehow, that moment was less about leather and more about something else entirely. Something that made me want to stick around the class, not just to make keychains or wallets, but to see what else I might discover about the craft, and maybe about Eli too. And that's when things started to get interesting. Because the next project wasn't just leather and tools. It was about risk, about trust, and yeah, maybe about learning how to let someone in when you've spent a long time keeping your skin too soft to waste. The next weekend, I showed up early, more out of curiosity than any real confidence. Eli was already there, smoothing out pieces of leather on the big work table. He glanced up when I came in and gave me that easy smile again, like he was glad to see me, but not surprised. "Ready to move on from keychains?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged, trying not to sound too eager. "I guess. What's next?" He pulled a chunk of leather from the pile and set it in front of me. "Wallets. Traditional bifold. Not too hard, but enough to keep you on your toes." The class was quieter this time. Most people focused on their own projects. But for me, I could barely concentrate. Eli's voice was low and steady as he walked us through the steps, but I found myself stealing glances at the way his hands moved. Calloused but careful, steady but kind. When I started cutting my piece, I was still nervous, but a little more confident. Eli came by to check on me and, without a word, adjusted my grip on the knife. His fingers brushed mine, just for a second. It was nothing, really, but for a guy who spent most of his time lost in his own head, it felt like a jolt. "You're getting better," he said quietly. "And you're not as soft as you think." I laughed, but the compliment caught me off guard. "Thanks, I think." He smiled, that crooked little thing that made his eyes crinkle. "You're welcome." Over the next couple of hours, I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of the work. Punching the holes, stitching the edges, folding the leather just right. It was oddly soothing. Like a meditation, but with the satisfaction of making something real with my hands. At one point, Eli came over with a coffee, black, just the way I liked it, and handed it to me without saying a word. I caught his eye and nodded a quick thanks. "So why'd you sign up for this class?" he asked after a while, leaning against the table beside me. I hesitated, not used to sharing much with people I barely knew. I guess I wanted something to focus on, something different from the usual grind, and maybe to prove to myself I could learn something new. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I was saying. "Yeah," he said finally, "sometimes you've got to get your hands dirty to find out what you're really made of." That line stuck with me, not because it was some deep, life-changing wisdom, but because there was honesty in it. No fluff, no hidden meaning, just straightforward truth. By the time the class ended, my wallet was far from perfect. The edges were a little uneven, the stitches not quite uniform, but it was mine. I held it up for Eli to see. "It's not terrible," I said, half joking. He examined it and nodded. "Not bad for your second try. Keep at it, and you'll get there." Before I could answer, he added, "Hey, there's a leatherworking meetup next week. Some folks from the class are going. You should come." I blinked, surprised. "Oh, I don't know, I'm kind of new to all this." "That's the point," he said, flashing that grin. "You got to get out of the studio and meet the community. Plus," he teased, "I need to make sure you don't quit after 2 classes." I laughed and shook my head. "All right, I'll think about it." Walking home that day, wallet in my bag, I realized that this wasn't just about leatherwork anymore. Eli had a way of making the ordinary feel charged, like there was something more underneath the surface, just waiting to be discovered. The next week, I found myself standing outside a small, cozy bar where the meetup was happening. The sign outside read, "Leather and Craft Collective," and when I pushed the door open, the smell of wood and leather hit me instantly, familiar and comforting. Inside, there were about a dozen people gathered in a corner, some holding finished projects, others chatting over drinks. Eli was there, naturally, and when he saw me enter, his face lit up. "Hey, you made it," he said, coming over to greet me. I felt my nerves spike. "Yeah, well, I'm here. That counts, right?" He laughed. "Definitely counts. Come meet everyone." The group was welcoming, with a mix of ages and backgrounds, all bonded by this shared craft. I found myself relaxing, swapping stories about mistakes and triumphs, and even showing off my imperfect wallet. At one point, Eli pulled me aside, away from the noise. "I'm impressed you came," he said softly. "Most guys bail after the first class." "I guess I'm stubborn," I replied. "Or maybe you're just good at convincing people," he shrugged, eyes twinkling. "Maybe a little of both." We stood there for a moment, the noise of the bar fading into the background. Then, without thinking, I asked, "Do you ever teach outside of classes? Like one-on-one?" He looked surprised, but didn't hesitate. "Yeah, sometimes." "Why?" "I don't know," I said, suddenly feeling a little foolish. I want to get better. And maybe it'd be fun to learn from you." He smiled, that slow, genuine smile that made my heart do something weird. "All right, let's make it happen." That night, walking home under the city lights, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the leather dust settling on my hands, or the way Eli's presence lingered in my mind. But whatever it was, I knew I was ready to take a chance. Not just on this craft, but maybe on something more, because sometimes being too soft to waste isn't a problem. It's the best reason to let someone in. A few days later, I found myself back at the studio, this time alone except for Eli. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows over the tables, scattered with tools and leather scraps. He had set up a small workspace just for us, and I felt a mix of anticipation and awkwardness, like I was about to start something new, but wasn't quite sure what that meant yet. "So, what's on the agenda?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but probably failing. Eli grinned. "We're making a watch strap today. It's a bit more intricate, but I think you're ready." I glanced at the leather and tools lined up in front of me. It looked serious. I swallowed hard. "Sounds fancy," he laughed. "It's just leather, thread, and a buckle. Fancy's what you make of it." We got to work, and he talked me through every step, the measuring, the cutting, the edge finishing. His hands moved confidently, but when he showed me how to stitch the leather, he was patient. guiding my fingers gently over the needle and thread. We didn't talk much at first, just the quiet sounds of tools and leather filling the room. It was nice, that silence between two people who don't feel the need to fill every moment with words. At one point, my thread snagged and I muttered a frustrated curse. Eli looked up and said, "Hey, slow down. It's not a race. Leatherwork's about patience and respect." Respect. The word hung in the air. I wondered if he was talking about the craft, or something else. He caught my glance and smiled softly. You can't rush it, or it gets messy. Same goes for a lot of things. I nodded, feeling a little too exposed by that. My fingers clumsily picked up where I left off, and Eli watched me with something like quiet encouragement. The more I worked, the less I felt like an outsider fumbling in a strange world. The leather started to take shape under my hands, and for once, I believed I could make something worthwhile. After a while, Eli leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. "You're doing better than you think. That strap's almost museum quality." I laughed, a little embarrassed. Museum quality? Come on. Yeah, seriously. You've got a good eye, and your hands are steady. I caught the way his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. My heart did that weird flip-flop again. Was this more than just teaching? When the strap was finished, I held it up like a trophy. Not bad, huh? Eli reached out and ran a finger over the smooth edges. Nice work. You're learning fast. There was a pause, then he said, "Want to grab a coffee? I know a place nearby." I hesitated but found myself nodding. Sure. Outside, the cool air hit my face as we walked side by side. The city buzzed around us, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble. We didn't talk much at first, just soaking in the rhythm of footsteps and distant conversations. At the coffee shop, we grabbed 2 cups and settled into a corner booth. The place was warm and cozy, with old jazz playing softly in the background. So Eli said, stirring his black coffee, "What got you into leatherwork anyway, besides my obvious charm as an instructor?" I smiled, feeling more relaxed now. Honestly, I think I was looking for something tangible, something that wasn't just screen time or endless emails. I wanted to make something real with my hands, something I could hold on to. He nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. There's something honest about making with your hands. It's like you're leaving a piece of yourself in the work. I looked at him, realizing that maybe he knew this more than most. Maybe that was why he taught, and why he noticed my soft hands in the first place. "Do you ever get tired of it?" I asked, curious. "Teaching, that is," he chuckled. "Some days, but then I see someone make that first cut or stitch, and it reminds me why I do it. Watching someone grow into the craft, it's kinda addictive." I took a sip of my coffee, feeling an unexpected warmth, not just from the drink. We talked for a while longer, sharing little stories about our lives, the kind of stuff you don't usually say on a first date, but somehow felt natural here. There was a softness to the conversation, a gentle unfolding that made me want to know more. On the walk back to the studio, the air had cooled, and the streetlights cast a golden glow on the pavement. We walked side by side, the silence between us comfortable now, not awkward. Before we parted, Eli stopped and looked at me seriously. "I like seeing you get better, but I'm curious about the guy behind the soft hands." I laughed, shaking my head. "Careful, you might scare me off." He grinned. "Good. I like a challenge." I felt a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, and I realized I wanted to see where this could go. Not just the leatherwork, but whatever this was between USAs. I walked home that night. My mind replayed the day. The stitching, the coffee, the way Eli's eyes held mine a little longer than necessary. I hadn't felt this alive in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, being too soft to waste was exactly why I deserved someone willing to take a chance on me. And I was ready to take a chance on him. Over the next few weeks, our after-class hangouts became a thing. It started with coffee, then dinner, and before I knew it, Eli and I were spending more time outside the studio than in it. There was something easy about being around him, a kind of quiet comfort that felt like coming home after a long day. One Thursday evening, after a long day of work and leather stitching, we ended up at a little dive bar Eli liked. The place was dimly lit, the kind of spot where the bartender knew your name and the jukebox played classic rock. We claimed a corner booth, and I ordered a beer, feeling the weight of the week finally start to lift. "So," Eli said, leaning back with that characteristic grin, "you think you're ready for the next project?" I raised an eyebrow. "At this rate, I'm not sure." "Ready" is the word I'd use. He laughed. "Fair. But I've got a special one in mind, something that's a bit more personal." I felt my pulse quicken. "Personal how?" Eli traced a finger along the rim of his glass, thoughtful. "It's a custom journal cover. You know, like the ones writers or travelers use. It's a way to carry your story with you." The idea struck a chord. I'd always been terrible at journaling, but the concept of making something that held memories, thoughts, or even dreams appealed to me. Still, I wasn't sure I was ready to dive that deep. "Sounds intense. What do I have to do?" He smirked. "Measure, cut, stitch, and pour a bit of yourself into it." I tooled my head. "Pour myself?" "Yeah," Eli said. "Leatherwork isn't just about the craft, it's about meaning. You can tell a lot about a person by what they make and how they make it." I stared at him, the words sinking in. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was more than just a hobby or a class. Maybe it was a chance to open up in a way I hadn't dared before. Back at the studio the next weekend, Eli laid out the leather for the journal cover. He had already cut the rough shape, but the real work was just beginning. "First, measure your journal," he said, handing me a ruler. "You want it snug, but not tight." I did as he said, the ruler feeling cool against my fingers. It was a small, leather-bound notebook I had picked up on a whim months ago, but had never used. I thought about why I'd bought it in the first place, maybe hoping to find some clarity, or to capture moments I was too scared to admit. Eli watched me work, his eyes soft. "You know, it's okay if this isn't perfect. Imperfections give it character." I nodded, appreciating the way he made mistakes sound like part of the process, not failures. As I cut the leather, the smell of it filled the room, earthy, strong, and oddly comforting. Eli showed me how to dye the edges, how to burnish them smooth. All the while, he stayed close, guiding without taking over. When it came time to stitch, my hands trembled a little, but Eli's steady presence calmed the nerves. We worked side by side, the quiet between us growing thick with something else, something unspoken but palpable. At one point, I looked up and caught him watching me, his eyes reflecting the low light. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shrugged with a shy smile. "Nothing. Just thinking how far you've come." I felt warmth flood my chest. The afternoon faded into evening, and by the time we finished, the journal cover was more than just leather and thread. It felt like a small, quiet declaration. Eli handed it to me carefully. "Your story, wrapped in leather." I ran my fingers over the cover, then looked up at him, words catching in my throat. "Thanks," I finally said, "for teaching me, for this." He leaned closer, voice low. "I'm glad you stuck around." There was a moment where everything seemed to pause. The hum of the city outside, the soft scrape of leather, the steady beat of my own heart. "Can I be honest?" I asked. "Always. I've been afraid to let anyone see the parts of me that aren't tough. That soft part you mentioned, it's been easier to hide it." He reached out, his hand brushing mine gently. "Soft isn't weak. It's where we feel, and feeling is what makes us alive." I swallowed hard, feeling a vulnerability I wasn't used to but didn't want to run from. "Maybe," I said, voice barely above a whisper, "I'm ready to stop hiding." Eli's smile widened, and he squeezed my hand. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." That night, I left the studio with the journal tucked under my arm and something new stirring inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, soft hands and all. After that night, things between Eli and me settled into a kind of easy rhythm I hadn't realized I was craving. It wasn't fireworks or grand gestures, but quiet moments, like the way we'd sit together at the studio, working on our own projects, yet somehow connected through the soft scrape of leather and the occasional exchange smile. One afternoon, a couple of weeks later, I showed up at the studio a little earlier than usual. The sun was warm, filtering through the windows and casting a golden glow over everything. Eli was already there, tinkering with some old leatherworking tools spread across the bench. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. "Early bird," he teased, wiping his hands on his apron. "Figured I'd get a head start," I said, setting down my bag. "Got a project in mind." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What are you thinking?" I pulled out a sketch I had been doodling, rough lines of a leather bracelet, something simple but with a bit of character. "I want to make something for myself, not just practice pieces." Eli leaned in, studying the drawing. "Looks good. You getting artsy on me?" "Maybe a little," I admitted, embarrassed but kind of proud. "Well, I'm here for critiques," he said with a wink. We spent the afternoon working together, and for the first time, I felt like I really understood the craft. Not just the techniques, but the meaning behind it. Eli patiently showed me how to punch holes evenly, how to dye edges so they didn't look rough, and how to pick the right thread color to make the piece stand out without screaming for attention. As I worked, Eli didn't just teach, he shared stories about the leather he'd worked with, the mistakes he'd made, the people he'd met through this craft. There was a vulnerability in his stories, a softness under the tough exterior I'd glimpsed before but was only now beginning to understand. Eventually, the bracelet took shape, a small, imperfect circle of leather that somehow felt like me. I held it up, grinning. "Not bad for a first try, huh?" Eli nodded, eyes warm. "It suits you." Those words hit me harder than I expected. To have someone see something about me, simple as it was, and call it fitting. It felt like being accepted in a way I hadn't known I needed. After we cleaned up, Eli suggested grabbing dinner at a taco place nearby. I said yes without hesitation. Over spicy tacos and cold beer, our conversation drifted from leather to life, our hopes, fears, things we didn't usually say out loud. I found myself opening up about the stuff I usually kept buried, the loneliness of city life, the pressure of always seeming fine when I wasn't, the parts of myself I was afraid to show. Eli listened without interrupting, just nodding and occasionally sharing his own experiences. There was no judgment, just a quiet understanding that made the space between us feel safe. As we walked back toward the studio, the night air cool and crisp, Eli stopped and looked at me. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for, a kind of steady trust. "I'm trying," I admitted. He smiled. "That's all anyone can ask." That night marked a turning point. The leatherworking was no longer just a hobby or a way to distract myself. It was a way to connect with the craft, with Eli, and with a part of myself I'd long kept hidden. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together, both in the studio and outside of it. Sometimes we'd work side by side, teasing each other over mistakes or celebrating small victories. Other times, we'd just sit, talking or sharing music, the leather scraps and tools forgotten on the table. One rainy evening, after a particularly long day working on a custom belt for a client, we found ourselves huddled in the studio, the rain tapping softly against the windows. "I have to admit," Eli said, stretching his arms and cracking his knuckles, "this is one of the best days I've had in a while." I smiled, feeling the truth of that. "Me too." There was a quiet pause, the kind that makes your chest tighten because something's about to shift. He looked at me, eyes searching. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you want this, the two of us, to be more than what it is?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought about it, nervously and a little desperately, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. "I do," I said, voice trembling just a bit. "More than anything." Eli reached out, his hand covering mine. The leather dust on his fingers felt warm, familiar. "Good," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "because I've been hoping you'd say that." In that moment, with the rain outside and the scent of leather surrounding us, everything fell into place. The softness I'd always hidden wasn't a weakness. It was the thing that made this possible. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to let it show. After that night, something between Eli and me shifted. like the quiet hum of the studio had turned into a steady rhythm that echoed in both of us. We didn't rush anything, no dramatic declarations or rushed kisses. Instead, it was subtle, lingering touches that lasted a heartbeat longer, glances that held more meaning, and the way our conversations deepened, peeling back layers I hadn't even realized were there. One Saturday, a couple of weeks after our conversation in the rain, Eli invited me over to his place to work on a project he'd been excited about. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I showed up with my leather scraps and a mix of nerves and anticipation. His apartment was exactly what you'd imagine for someone who spends his life working with his hands. Warm, a little messy, filled with books, tools, and leather projects in various stages scattered across the living room. The smell of cedar and musk mixed with the faint tang of leather made me feel instantly at ease. He handed me a couple of thick leather hides and said, "Thought we'd try something bigger today, maybe a messenger bag." I blinked. "Whoa, that's ambitious," he grinned. "Ambition's good. Besides, I think you're ready." We spread the leather out on the floor and began sketching the pattern. Eli's instructions were patient and clear, but what struck me most was how he encouraged my input. He wanted this to be something one made, not just me following orders. As we worked, I noticed how natural it was to be near him. The occasional brush of his hand against mine when we reached for the same tool, the way he'd glance over and smile when I nailed a tricky cut. Those little moments felt electric. At one point, I fumbled with the measurements and Eli's hand steadied mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and I caught my breath. "You're doing great," he said softly. "Don't doubt yourself." I wanted to believe him. Hours passed, and the bag slowly took shape, sturdy but elegant, with hand-stitched seams that told a story of patience and care. By the time we finished, my hands were sore, but my chest felt full in a way I hadn't expected. Eli looked at the finished product, and then at me, eyes shining. "See what you can do when you stop doubting?" I smiled, a little breathless. "I guess I needed the right teacher." He laughed. "And maybe the right reason." There was a pause, long enough for my heart to race. "Can I ask you something?" I said, voice catching. "Anything. Do you think this could really work?" "Us, I mean." His smile softened, and he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "I don't just think it," he said quietly. "I know it." The tenderness in his words made something inside me unclench. Me too. That night, after I left his apartment, I felt like I was walking on air. It wasn't just the excitement of new love. It was the relief of finding someone who saw my softness not as a flaw, but as a strength. Someone who wanted to hold it gently, like Eli did. In the following weeks, our relationship deepened, not without its awkward moments and unspoken fears, but with a foundation built on honesty and patience. We balanced work, life, and leather projects, learning each other's rhythms. One evening, Eli surprised me with tickets to a small leathercraft exhibit downtown. Walking through the gallery, surrounded by beautifully crafted pieces, I felt proud, not just of the art, but of how far I'd come. As we stood in front of a stunning handcrafted satchel, Eli took my hand. "You know," he said, "you're the reason I'm still teaching. You remind me why this craft matters." I squeezed his hand, heart full. "And you're the reason I'm still trying. You make me believe I can be more than too soft to waste." He smiled, that slow, warm smile I'd come to cherish. Later, as we walked beneath the city lights, Eli pulled me close. "I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Neither could I. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the scent of leather lingering on our skin, I finally understood what he meant all those weeks ago, when he said my skin was too soft to waste. It wasn't a warning or a criticism. It was an invitation. An invitation to be seen, to be held, and to be loved just as I was. And I was ready to say yes. Months passed, and with every project Eli and I tackled together, the belts, the wallets, that messenger bag, the connection between us grew stronger, more natural. What started as leatherworking lessons had blossomed into a partnership that felt less like a whirlwind and more like settling into a well-loved rhythm. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves back in the studio, the sun filtering softly through the windows. The room smelled of leather and cedar, familiar and comforting. I was working on a small case for my phone, fumbling with the stitching as usual, while Eli sharpened his tools nearby. He looked up and caught me struggling with a knot. Without a word, he came over, took my hand gently, and showed me how to tie it properly. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt that same warmth I'd grown to crave. After a moment, I met his gaze and smiled. "Thanks for not giving up on me," he grinned, eyes crinkling. "I never will." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. Then Eli reached behind his back, pulling out a small, hand-stitched leather box. The edges were smooth, the color rich and warm. "I made this," he said quietly. "For you." My heart sped up as I opened it, revealing a simple leather bracelet inside, our initials subtly embossed on the inside band. It was perfect in its understatedness, a symbol of something real. I looked up at him, voice catching. "It's beautiful. Thank you." He shrugged. "You're too soft to waste, remember?" I wanted to make something that could hold that softness. Keep it safe. I laughed softly, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the pure, quiet joy of being seen and accepted. "I think I'm ready now," I said. "Ready to stop hiding, to be soft and strong all at once." Eli took my hand, lace and all, and squeezed. "You've been that way all along. I just helped you see it." As we left the studio that evening, the city lights twinkling around us, I realized that learning to work with leather had been about more than just crafting objects. It had been about discovering how to hold and be held, without fear. And in Eli's steady presence, I finally understood that softness wasn't a flaw. It was a strength worth protecting, a part of me that deserved love. We walked side by side, hands intertwined, ready to face whatever came next, together.